Selection decisions are the result of a process. Regardless of how formal or intentional it is, that process represents a number of decisions about how to make a decision, including how to combine information from different sources. I included this graphic in the introduction video for this module to illustrate the process. While the specific steps will vary with the organization and the number of roles being filled, we can use it to think about the common parts as well as parts of the process that should be more common. There are 4 parts that are probably represented in most, if not all, selection decisions: identifying applicants, assessment, or gathering data about the applicants, rejection, and placement. It seems like it's pretty common for assessment to be a resume or an application and one unstructured interview. In this model, the resume or application would be the preliminary assessment and the interview a formal assessment. In many cases, the prediction steps seem to be combined into one, though. The boxes at the upper right represent some of the decisions about decision making. In some organizations, they might be very informal, if not somewhat overlooked. Given what you learned about person-job fit, though, you can probably imagine some of the problems that can create when selection doesn't deliberately consider the characteristics necessary to complete the job. When an organization has the resources to complete a formal job analysis and to design a selection process for each job, the process might look something like the steps in this slide. That means that the decisions are informed by the requirements of the job and valid assessments of the relevant knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. The model on the graphic we looked at earlier included 2 steps for assessments, and in other recordings I mentioned using more than one source of information. So how do we put all that information together to make a decision? The approaches tend to be grouped into 2 categories: statistical decision-making and clinical decision-making. A statistical approach uses a formula based on the job requirements and what's measured by each assessment. Clinical approaches involve a person looking at the information and weighing the options. As you can imagine, they each have strengths and weaknesses, one of which relates to their efficiency. Applying a statistical model can be much quicker than having someone look at all the candidates. Whether the information is combined statistically or by a person, the process can be more efficient when it uses what's called a hurdle system, a system where a candidate is no longer considered for the job if they don't have a particular score or scores. That approach is called non-compensatory because a high score in one area can't balance out a low score in another area. Like I said, it's efficient, but if the system isn't very deliberately designed, it might not result in the best candidates clearing the hurdles. For example, I've seen a few articles recently about using a certain number of years' experience as a hurdle early in the process, and about how bad that can actually be in practice. Years of experience might mean the candidate is familiar with the job, but that familiarity might not create any advantage. If the organizations are very different, or if there's a need for innovation, it can actually lead to worse performance compared to someone who's just learning about the job. So maybe the hurdle needs to be refined to experience in the industry or defined in terms of a different individual difference characteristic that's more relevant for successful performance. Another option is to use a compensatory system. The idea of a compensatory system is that a strong score on one variable can balance out a lower score on another variable. For example, if my score on a relevant personality characteristic was fairly high, I wouldn't be disqualified for a lower score on a knowledge characteristic. As with many decisions, selecting someone for a new role is usually, or probably should be, the result of a process with a few steps and involving multiple types of information. To be most effective, that process should be based on the characteristics someone needs to be successful in the role. Information about those characteristics can be combined in a statistical formula or by a person who considers all the data. Either way, in some situations, there are characteristics that are important enough to be make it or break it criteria.